According to data from the Food Foundation, levels of food insecurity are continuing to rise. 7.3% of Brits were food insecure in 2021, and that number rose to 8.8% the following year. To find out more about it, I headed to London to speak with the Food Foundation's Anna Taylor. So hi Anna, thanks for joining me today. I just really wanted to find out a bit more about food security and why we can't really solve it in Britain. So just to give us a bit of a starting point, what does food security actually encompass?
Well, first of all, I think we can solve it, just so you know, when we come to that in the interview. But I'll explain what we mean when we talk about food insecurity amongst households. And really that's the experience of not being able to secure enough food to eat well. So in mild forms, that might mean that you are trading down in health terms. You might not be able to afford a healthy diet, but you can still put food on the table. In more extreme forms, moderate and severe food insecurity, it might mean you're skipping meals, you're going for a whole day without eating, you're reducing the size of your portions that you're eating. And doing other strategies to try and basically make your money go that much further so that you can put something on the table. And, we've got a very severe situation at the moment, particularly during the cost of living crisis. But we came into this crisis with really high levels of food insecurity before that. So we've made a bad situation now a lot worse.
And how have those levels since the pandemic changed?
Well, we've seen since January of last year a doubling of levels of food insecurity. So we've now got about 17% of households, a quarter of households with children, who in the past month have reported, where adults have reported either skipping meals, going for a whole day without eating, or going hungry and not eating. So there's three questions we ask. And we've been tracking food insecurity for almost 3 years now, since the start of the pandemic. And we've done 11 rounds of surveys. So we've got very good timeline data, and we can see that just very rapid escalation that's happened during the course of last year. And, the reasons for that are, to some extent obvious, insofar as our costs have gone up hugely with fuel and food. But, obviously, people don't have a budget, which is like, well, that's my fuel budget, that's my food budget. It's a budget. If you've got to pay more keeping the lights on, it tends to eat into that food budget, because the food budget's the bit you can raid. You can't, stop paying your rent. You kind of cut back on food. It's the bit of the budget that's sort of, a bit more fungible, really. So you see that in terms of how people then make decisions about what they're going to buy.
You said that this was something that we were seeing, obviously, before the pandemic. Now it's got worse since the pandemic. What has been driving this, and what's made it worse?
Well, prices have made it a lot worse. But don't forget also, during the pandemic, many people got into debt, used up their savings. So people's resilience is very, very low. And our starting point really for, very many working households are in this sort of circumstances where they're facing food insecurity. And many working households are on low pay and low levels of benefits, things like universal credit. What we see, first of all, is that people's low wages are not enough to secure a basic standard of living. But also the benefit levels are set now so low that they also, particularly if you're not in work, maybe you're a full-time carer, you've got a disability, a long-term health condition, multiple reasons why you might not be in work, that money is also not enough to guarantee a decent diet.
And what kind of impact would you say that recent political decisions have had on food security?
Well, we obviously, during the pandemic, we had for example, a £20 increase in universal credit, which was a great measure for really providing some protection and a safety net for those lower income families. That was taken away, which was a very significant step backwards. Thankfully, the government did decide to uprate benefits in line with inflation. There's quite a big lag in that system. Some of the measures around energy have been really good and important. The problem is that overall it just doesn't amount to enough. And we've still got, for example, one of the things we've been really asking the government to think about is extending free school meals to more children, because at the moment you've got to earn less than £7,400 as a household over a year in order to qualify. And there's a lot of children who are below the poverty line and don't qualify. And so what we've been asking the government is just to extend that threshold, just so that we can catch more of those children, because that would be something quite easy. It's very targeted, and we know it will deliver both educational outcomes as well as health and well-being outcomes, and provide a little bit of stress reduction for these families that are under so much economic pressure.
And what kind of part to play does the food, production sector have?
Well, I mean, obviously, at the end of the day, the food industry, what comes out of the food industry is, what we see in our shops. And the challenge that we've got at the moment is that if you're on a very low income and you've not got much, or your budget is under a lot of pressure, you're going to be pushed towards the cheapest sorts of calories. If you basically are worried about waste, you don't want to be putting stuff on the table which is going to go in the bin. So you're very reluctant to try new things, because that's a high risk strategy when you've not got much money. And you're focusing on, right, how can I fill tummies up for the lowest cost? And that takes you generally to quite low nutrient foods, foods which are not particularly good for your health, particularly if you're worried about cooking as well, which many families are at the moment with the cost of energy bills. So what I think the challenge for the food industry is, how do we tip that balance of prices from unhealthy calories being 3 times cheaper than healthy calories overall? What are the things that can happen? So within categories, for example, we're encouraging retailers to think, well, okay, let's take the yogurt category. Kids eat a lot of yogurts. How do we make sure if a family's trading down in the cost of yogurt, that they're not landing with a product that's like jam-packed full of sugar, but they're landing with a product which is a healthy yogurt at the end of the day? So within categories, I think food producers need to be really thinking about that. How are they pricing their products in such a way that this doesn't make a bad situation even worse for very low income families?
But we've also got to kind of balance the, I suppose, the cost of production as well, because a lot of what we're hearing is that the price of food doesn't reflect the cost of production. And compared to some other, countries, for example, the US, our food is a lot cheaper. So how do we square that circle?
Well, I mean, you're right. And we obviously need to be paying our producers properly. I mean, I'm particularly concerned about, fruit and veg growers in Britain at the moment, who are increasingly saying we just can't, it's no longer possible for us to plant new crops, put stuff in the ground, because we know we can't make ends meet. So I'm very sympathetic to that. I think the onus really needs to be on some of these issues of price, needs to be on government to think, right, what's the right mix of incentives that need to be in the system to tip that balance of prices in the right way, whether it's what combination of taxes and subsidies needs to happen to make that possible. And then we need to deal with the problem that people have got incomes which are just too low. So we don't want to be solving food poverty by pushing down prices. And I mean, that is not a solution that we should be pushing for. We need to be rebalancing prices to help people to eat well, and we need to be solving the income challenges. But the food industry, of course, is a big employer. So I would first and foremost be getting the food companies to be thinking, okay, how many of my staff are food insecure? Like, I should be asked, as an employer, I should know the answer to that question. I should be worried about people that are in my employment that might be in that kind of set of circumstances. So really thinking what I can do to do my best to support my staff, because we know, the food industry is a massive employer in Britain. So many of those families that are in our stats that I cited will be working in the food industry, and the NHS and the teaching profession,
Yeah, absolutely. So, food security is a mixture of different things. It's obviously accessibility, it's nutrition, and it's also safety as well.
Yeah.
So how does the food sector balance all of those things? I suppose that triangle, and ensure they're delivering on all of those points.
Well, I mean, it's tough. The food industry is doing in the face of these immense sort of shocks to the system, like the Ukraine war, like coming out of the European Union and the implications for trade. And of course, all the sort of permutations in the system that happened during COVID, it's kind of remarkable that we've still got food on our shelves to the quality and safety standards that we have in Britain. And that's something to be proud of. I think now the expectations of our food system are shifting. It's not enough just to have safe food on our shelves. We have that. And obviously, I'm not taking away from the fact there are still safety risks and we need to pay attention to those. But I think we've had that well covered. I think now our expectations of the food industry are, we actually want more than that. We want better health and environmental outcomes from what you're doing. So getting food industry leaders to really think about boardroom conversations about, right, are we going in the right direction on some of these big metrics on health and environment? Or are we actually part of this problem, and getting companies to really think quite seriously about that and what their conversation is with government about it. Because obviously there's only so far that a company can go without a level playing field in the regulatory space. So being a little bit more front-footed with the government and saying, well, actually, we need you to regulate this because we can't do this on our own. We want to go in this direction, but we can't. Our competitors will take our market share. Yeah. We need government to act.
Yeah. And just to put it out there, if you were a leader for a day, a government leader for a day, what would you change? What would you do?
Right now, I would extend free school meals. I just think what we're doing with children, every day they're growing, their brains are developing. You miss this opportunity, that's a missed opportunity which will stay with them, literally stay with them through their lives, And I think so that opportunity lost now and stacking up problems for later by not really properly taking care of our kids is something which I think has to be the top of any government list. It's not at the moment.
Thank you so much, Anna.
No, pleasure.
It was great meeting with Anna, but I knew the story didn't end there. I decided to meet with Nick Allen at BMPA's headquarters to discuss the UK supply chains and see what else he could tell me.
Tune in next episode to find out what Nick had to say.